medieval art. Challenges. In the winding and shadowy alleys of the Middle Ages, where cobblestones echoed with the rhythmic pounding of metal on anvil, the heartbeat of a civilization was being shaped. These echoes were more than the forging of tools or weapons. They were the sounds of culture, faith, control, and creativity colliding. Here, in this complex and often contradictory world, the story of medieval art unfolded, not as a tale of freedom, but of constraint, discipline, and spiritual devotion. Art in the Middle Ages wasn't born from personal inspiration, but from a divine mandate, a commission, a tradition. The artist was not a visionary, but a servant of the church, the crown, or the guild. To understand medieval art, one must first understand the force that ruled nearly every aspect of life in this era: the Catholic Church. It was the greatest commissioner of art and its most vigilant censor. Every fresco painted, every manuscript illuminated, every sculpture carved was subject to religious scrutiny. Themes were strictly prescribed: the life of Christ, the miracles of saints, the torments of hell, and the glory of heaven. To deviate from these themes was not merely controversial, it could be fatal. An artist who dared to depict something considered theologically incorrect could face severe consequences: excommunication, ruin, even death. Women, meanwhile, faced barriers even more impenetrable. They were barred from joining most guilds, the institutions that governed and protected artisans. Their access to training, tools, and commissions was minimal. Only within convents, where women lived cloistered and spiritual lives, did a few manage to contribute to the arts. And even then, their work was rarely signed, often anonymous, and frequently attributed to male counterparts. The art of medieval women, much like their lives, was hidden behind walls, both literal and symbolic. The materials of medieval art were sacred in themselves. Stone, especially limestone and sandstone, formed the foundation of cathedral facades. These walls were then adorned with intricate carvings of biblical scenes, saints, demons, and gargoyles, each figure serving a theological and didactic purpose. Inside the churches, wooden sculptures crafted from oak and walnut decorated altars and pulpits. On the page, sacred texts were penned on parchment, the painstakingly prepared skin of sheep or goats. The ink was made from oak galls, mixed with wine or vinegar. Colors were ground by hand from rare minerals: the deep blue of lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, the crimson of vermilion, the vibrant green of malachite. Gold leaf, pressed thin as breath, was used to represent divine light. Every material carried spiritual weight. Every stroke, every hue, was a form of worship. Art was a spiritual act, but also a fearful one. In monastic scriptoria, monks labored by candlelight, copying texts and adorning them with elaborate illustrations. These illuminations were not merely decorative, they were theological commentary, visual prayers. Yet every line had to be perfect. An error could render a sacred text invalid. A misplaced image could be considered blasphemous. Thus, artistic creation was as much about discipline and obedience as it was about beauty. Outside of monasteries, independent artists worked under the strict expectations of patrons, bishops, kings, wealthy merchants. Their work was often collaborative, created in workshops under the name of a master. These artists were trained from a young age through apprenticeships. Creativity was secondary to craft. An artist's reputation depended not. Art was a spiritual act, but also a fearful one. In monastic scriptoria, monks labored by candlelight, copying texts and adorning them with elaborate illustrations. These illuminations were not merely decorative, they were theological commentary, visual prayers. Yet every line had to be perfect. An error could render a sacred text invalid. A misplaced image could be considered blasphemous. Thus, artistic creation was as much about discipline and obedience as it was about beauty. Outside of monasteries, independent artists worked under the strict expectations of patrons, bishops, kings, wealthy merchants. Their work was often collaborative, created in workshops under the name of a master. These artists were trained from a young age through apprenticeships. Creativity was secondary to craft. An artist's reputation depended not on innovation, but on reliability, skill, and orthodoxy. Artisans rarely signed their works. The few who did, like the Italian painter Giotto, were exceptional, and even then, their fame was limited to their time and place. This anonymity reflects how society viewed artists, not as creators, but as instruments. They were respected for their technical abilities, but not celebrated for personal vision. Intellectual and creative freedom, as we understand it today, did not apply. An artist who experimented with naturalistic forms, who showed too much emotional expression, or who introduced secular elements, risked being accused of vanity or heresy. It was not until the Renaissance, with its emphasis on humanism and the individual, that artists began to emerge as thinkers, philosophers, and cultural icons. Yet even within the strictures of faith and order, medieval artists developed profound visual languages. Stained glass windows turned cathedrals into radiant spaces of storytelling. These windows, constructed with pieces of colored glass held together by lead, portrayed the lives of saints, the passion of Christ, and moral allegories. In an era when most people were illiterate, these images served as the Bible for the eyes. Likewise, frescoes, painted on wet plaster walls, brought sacred narratives to life in vivid color and movement. Manuscript illuminations, often no larger than a hand, were dense with meaning and mystery, their borders teeming with angels, beasts, and vines.